Right. Good evening to everyone who's joined this evening. Thank you very much for coming along to my presentation, Nurturing Presentation Skills by Lessening Anxiety. I'm Niall Walsh and I work at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies. This presentation is about presentation, so I feel extra nervous doing it. It's about presentations, giving presentations in class. Just a little bit of background to my own story and context. I started working at NUFS last April. And of course, with NUFS this year, we've been online. So all the presentation I've done have been online using Zoom. But previous to working at NUFS, I worked at a high school for returnee students. And I worked there for 5 years. But during those 5 years, I was teaching academic writing and presentation skills to students. So I have quite a lot of experience teaching presentations. And when I began teaching presentations at that time, 5 years ago, well, 6 years ago now, I wasn't quite sure what to do or how to teach presentation skills to students. Basically, I was, okay, eye contact and voice are very important. So I knew that before starting the class. But I didn't know of any activities to use for the students to help them improve their presentation skills. But I do like materials development. So I was very interested in developing materials for this, and which I've done. So this presentation tonight, now, it's not going to be full of data or research. It's more practical, unlike some of the other presentations. This is more practical for you guys to use in your classrooms. Again, online at the moment in NUFS, but when we do go back on campus, you can use some of these activities. Also, you can use some of these activities for online presentations too. So let me begin my presentation. If I know how to, okay, just a moment. Okay. All right, so introduction. Yeah, in recent years, I think in English as a second language classes, there's been a focus on, of course, communication, but there's a focus on developing critical thinking skills with the high school I worked at and also in university. So we're all in our courses, I'm sure that we try and develop students' critical thinking skills. Of course, communication, but also get them thinking about a topic and discussing that with their classmates. And also we have seen an increase in presentations, their opinions on whatever they've discussed with their classmates. So this has been increasing, I think, over the past maybe 20 or 15 to 20 years in university settings in Japan. So with that, for example, the course we teach at the moment at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies, this is a task that some of you are probably very familiar with, this one here. So students have to give a presentation on this one. So we see here lots of advertisements every day. Let's look at some different advertisements around us and think about the purpose and target group of the advertisement. And then the students have to research an advertisement and maybe give their opinion on the advertisement too. So this is one that I'm currently teaching at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for a few minutes. And in the breakout room, I want you to have a look at this here, this presentation, the topic. And when you come back, I want you to have prepared a presentation, but I want you to prepare the presentation in Japanese. And I'm going to ask you for the presentation in Japanese when you come back to the main room. So let me do that. Look, we lost somebody. I'm actually not going to do that. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. But if I was, how did you feel when I said that? Let me ask Pete, how did you feel, Pete, knowing that you're going to a breakout room and you're going to have to prepare a presentation in Japanese and present in Japanese when you come back?
Yeah, I was up for it. No, I'm slightly nervous, I guess, a bit, yeah, you know.
Okay, but you're up for it, okay?
Yeah, well, yeah, needs my full concentration, but yes, yeah. I'm willing.
Let me go then ask Amy. How did you feel, Amy?
I will probably leave the meeting.
Why would you leave the meeting, Amy?
You should have told us earlier.
Yeah. How did you feel? Did you feel confident that you'd be able to do it?
honestly, in Japanese, slightly confident, but I don't know if I'll be really comfortable, you know.
Let me ask Fern, how did you feel, Fern?
Uneasy. I wasn't pleased, but I wasn't terribly happy about it.
Thanks, Fern. All right, so some mixed reactions there to that. But as Amy was saying, she was going to leave the room there if we had to do it. And I think I know myself personally, when I go into breakout rooms, or sorry, into presentations, I'm not very comfortable when I'm asked to give my opinion on something. But this is a presentation, and this is what we're telling students to do in the classroom. So of course, we give students a long time to prepare for it, and then they have to present on that. But basically, they're presenting their opinion on something in a foreign language, not in their native language, which does create anxiety for students. And anxiety in ESL, there have been studies on anxiety in ESL classes. We have some up here in Japanese context. So that's well documented that students do have anxiety in their ESL classes. But surprisingly, there's a lack of research into anxiety in ESL presentations. So for this presentation myself, I was researching a little bit about it, and I couldn't find any information on it. What students go through. Of course, there is lots of published research on presentations in general, anxiety with presentations in general. And it's well documented that the biggest fear of most people is presentations. But when you have to do it in a second language, of course, it'll increase the anxiety for the students. So we have to be aware of that, especially when there was research done before by Williams and Andred in 2008. And again, this was focusing primarily on anxiety in the ESL classroom. But when I read through the research, this kind of struck me here. Specifically, anxiety was often associated with tasks involving speaking in front of others. Williams and Andred, they researched over 250 students in a Japanese university. But they found this, yeah, so overwhelmingly, maybe anxiety increased when talking in front of people. Yeah, most commonly mentioned was having to stand before a class, give a speech, read aloud, or from memory. So basically giving a presentation in front of a group of people increases students' anxiety. Anxiety gets a bit less as we become more familiar with the people in the room. So even now I know a few people here, so I'm not as anxious as I would be if I didn't know anyone here. So when you do know people, it becomes less, anxiety becomes less. But how can we as teachers create confident presenters? So how can we do that as teachers? Give the student the confidence to go from being very anxious to actually being up there on stage and shining. For me personally as a teacher, I feel so sorry for students when they come down after presenting and they don't do a good job and they sit down and you can see their face, they're kind of, oh, yeah. They know they could have given more, but they didn't. The same for us ourselves as presenters. When you do a good presentation, afterwards you feel good. But if it's not so good, you feel a bit chotto, yeah, after that. So how can we create confident presenters? For me, these are some essential components of presentations that I incorporate into my classes. Delivery, of course, so students presenting. Engagement. It's very important to engage with the audience in front of you. And also visual aids. So these are three things that I focus on in my classes when I'm teaching presentation skills to my students. I'm going to introduce delivery and engagement. I'm not going to cover visual aids because we don't have much time for that. And I think generally students are good with visual aids, in my experience anyway, with that. Delivery. Yeah. Delivery is remembering what to say. Okay. I almost forgot that. And saying it. The reason I have remembering here, for me personally, when I'm teaching presentations, students are very good at memorization. They memorize things. But for me, that's not a presentation. Memorizing is not presenting. So I like to call it remembering what they're going to say rather than memorization. Because you often get students standing at the front of the class and they remember or they memorize something and it's just spitting it out. but it's not computing what the meaning is not computing in their head what they're saying. Oh, sorry, there's a ambulance going by. And then saying it as well. So saying it. Sorry, guys. We'll let that pass. Okay. So remembering what to say. So how can we encourage students to remember what to say? To give them the confidence when they're on the stage to present. One thing that I like to do in my classes is create a mind map or create mind maps. Some of you are probably familiar with mind maps. Rather than list a lot of explanations, it's very easy just to explain it by a picture. Here, this is an example of a mind map that one of my students made a few years ago. So I have students create a visual for themselves. You can do this in class, or I like to do it outside of class. I don't like to spend too much time drawing in class. So I usually assign it for homework or outside of class. The students have to visualize what they're going to say. And it's like branches coming off from the center. So this was a self-introduction. So we had the student in the center, and then we had different things coming off what the student was going to say about herself. But again, it's getting away from memorization. So it's a visual. So students have to fill in the details with their own words. Here. So this has proved useful for students. And then when they have created this mind map, they can use it as a reference before the presentation. So if they're on the train or if they're on wherever they are traveling around, they can have a look at it. And then hopefully they'll visualize it on the day of the presentation. They'll have a visual image of the presentation in their head, and they will relay it to the audience. So I have found this worked very well for me, mind maps. Saying it. So it's remembering, but saying it. Shadowing is something that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, or maybe all of you are familiar with. And Murphy, Murphy came in late there. Murphy said shadowing is a popular language learning technique usually employed to improve pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. Yeah, to shadow. So usually people listen to something and say it along at the same time. But I've incorporated this into my presentation as a remembering activity. So what I do have is I have students record certain parts of the presentation. I'm very reluctant to have them record all of the presentation because for the same reason I gave earlier about memorization, I don't want them to remember it. Or sorry, memorization, I don't want them to memorize it. So I do encourage them to record parts of the presentation or words that are difficult. And I help them with those words, and then they'll record them themselves on a device. And then they can listen back to the device. And as they listen back, they can repeat it to themselves. So this also has proved useful in my classes for my students. And you can do this online as well. So this doesn't have to be in the classroom. You can do this online with students now, your students, if you're teaching presentation skills. That's another activity. So those two activities are about delivery. So when the students are speaking, remembering their script, and then speaking, saying the script. After that, I focus on engagement. And actually, I prefer the engagement part because students can have a lot of fun with some of these activities. Engagement, maybe eye contact and also movement. The eye contact. So we're all told that eye contact is very important for a presentation. So I came up with an eye contact race game. I wondered, how can I teach eye contact to students? You can tell them, look at each other, but they don't, they don't. So I wanted to kind of force them to look at each other in a fun way, a non-threatening way. So we practice a few times eye contact, and this game here, eye contact race game. Basically here, it's a group of students, so I do prepare a phrase. I usually get song lyrics or one line from a famous song, and I give that to the students. And you can have it individually, depending on how many students in your class, or you can have it as a group. Generally, I have a group go up because students are not as intimidated if they're in a group or with 2 or 3 other people. So I have them go to the front of the class, and then they have to repeat this line that I have given them. But as they do, the audience, the other students in the class, I have them raise their hand. And the students at the front who are reading the line, their aim is to get every student to put their hand down. But how do they do that? With eye contact. They have to make eye contact. So I have a timer, and I sit at the back of the room, and I press the timer, ready, go. And then the students will say their phrase. For example, I'm trying to think of a lyric, some lyric that they say. And they repeat that. And as they do, they're trying to make eye contact. And then the next student in the group will say the lyric as well, and they will also try. And then the next person, next person, next person. And as they do, as they make eye contact, the other students lower their hands. And the final person that they should make eye contact with is me. So I'm at the back. And when I lower my hand, I will stop the timer. And we'll see then. Then we'll have another group come up and another race game. The students really, really enjoy this. I was surprised how much they enjoyed it. And it's so surprising that the first time that I usually do it 2 or 3 times. The first time, the times maybe it could be 1 minute. But the next time it's 30 seconds. And then it's maybe down to 20 seconds. So they're getting faster. So they are making eye contact with their friends or the other classmates. They're improving the eye contact. But if you do this, please be careful, because eye contact is about making a connection with the students. So I always tell the students who are in the audience to be a little bit strict with the group at the front. So unless you actually feel that they made eye contact with you, do not lower your hand. Because sometimes students are, then put their hand down, yeah. I say, if you think, that's not eye contact. Only if you feel that they actually made eye contact with you, lower your hand. And then you can build on it. You can have students do it again and repeat it again. But this is a good activity to use, I think. And it does work. It's amazing how it works. When it does come to presentations, students do improve their eye contact. I've seen that myself. So it's an activity you could use in the classroom. Movement as well. This one here. So to keep interest, this is something I've done before. Do I have a, I do here. So basically what I do is, again, groups or individual. And I like my students to move around when they're presenting, because I think in high school in Japan, if they're presenting in Japanese, from my experience, again, they're stationary. They stand behind the podium and they speak. But I encourage students to move around the podium and try and engage with the audience. So what I do, again, I prepare a passage for them to read. Yeah, but I want to involve the audience. So I prepare the audience some cards as well. Sorry, it's quite small here. I'm not sure if you can see the cards here. But the audience have role cards. So for example, 30 seconds, talk to the person next to you. Then 45 seconds, use your mobile phone. 60 seconds, begin to fall asleep. So different things that they can do, the audience. And the people at the front, they're going to present, but they have to be very conscious. They have to be aware of the audience. It's building awareness of the audience in front of them. And if they notice someone, for example, using their phone, I encourage them to go towards that person. Yeah, or kind of direct your gaze towards that person. Don't be scowling, don't be getting angry, but try and bring them back into the presentation in a natural way. And then again, at 60 seconds, begin. If someone's fallen asleep, I do encourage the audience to be quite obvious at times, or you might have them being subtle as well. But if someone's fallen asleep, then the student again will probably direct their gaze or walk towards them. Basically what we do as teachers as well, if students are like that in the classroom, we might go towards them. Yeah, just to get them moving around the classroom, or moving around the podium. And this as well has worked well for me when it comes to the presentations the students do. They move more around the room. Not so much around the room, but maybe around the podium, around the front of the classroom, to try and involve everybody in the presentation. So it's engaging the students, the audience, in the presentation. Another activity I use this is the last activity I'm going to introduce for movement, is moving numbers. And this is another one that I like. Again, depending on the space you have available to you, I do place numbers on the floor at the front of the classroom. If it's a large area, you could maybe 1 to 15. You just put numbers, you can put tape, sticky tape, and just write the number on it. But I want I want students to navigate themselves around the numbers from 1 to maybe 10 or 1 to 7, whatever numbers they are, in a natural way. And again, this is very fun because students, when they first do it, they just keep moving around, not very naturally. But the more they practice, the more they try and build the movement into their presentation. Yeah, you can give them a passage again, maybe a longer passage this time, and ask them, give them time to prepare it. Where are you going to move maybe for this part, where this part, this part, this part, this part, and then have them at the front practice doing that. But it just shows students that the requirement for them to move around the room or the front of the room. So it also worked very well for me. I enjoyed doing that. So guys, I think I don't think I have much time left, but there are just some activities that I've introduced for students to develop their presentation skills in the classroom. Basically, they're confidence building skills. So if students practice beforehand with their delivery, if they have shadowing, if they try and remember, if they have a mind map to remember their script, shadow themselves, help them with pronunciation, maybe intonation, rhythm, and so on. And then also the movement engagement with the eye contact at the front. So the eye contact race game works very well. I really encourage you to do that. Maybe it's impossible on a computer, but I'm trying very hard to look at the camera here, so they get to keep eye contact with all of you guys. And also the movement as well at the front of the classroom, that works very well too. And I think if you can incorporate some of those activities into your classroom, you will have more confident presenters at the end of the day. Yeah. So conclusion, well, that was my conclusion. Conclusion would be, there's an increase in presentations in language classrooms. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of us teach presentations in our classes, but it does increase anxiety for students. So as teachers, we do need to build confidence to lessen that anxiety. Yeah, and these are my references. Thank you for staying awake. At least I hope you are awake. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or suggestions?
Sorry, I've got a question. In the worst case scenario where we have to go online again next year, how might teaching presentation skills change? Because things like movement and perhaps even eye contact will not be so vital. Maybe
yes.
online. Yeah,
this year was a struggle for me to try and incorporate the skills into the online environment. Yeah, it's difficult. I do with my students, and I don't know if you noticed, but I'm just looking at the camera the whole time. I try to look at the camera the whole time I know it's not perfect, but I try and maintain eye contact with the camera. With that, so I encourage students to do that. With the movement, of course, you can have gestures. One idea I was thinking, which it might be difficult to do, is to actually have students stand away from the camera so we can see the whole body. We can see their movements. If you position them away, but if you move them away from the camera, you won't be able to see the eye contact then. It's very hard to see that. So you're kind of losing that. But it was one idea I was going to play around with. But then again, a lot of our students are in their bedrooms, so they don't have much space to move back from the camera. So yes, Nick, it's difficult to actually. I'm doing some research. I just said I wasn't doing research. I haven't done research before, but I intend to do a survey with students on presentations. So how they felt they went this year, compared to the in-class presentations. But it's difficult. Yeah, the movement especially. Unless you can, as I said, you can position the students a good bit away from the camera where you can see them, their movement. Then, but yeah, I don't know how you can get around that one.
I do wonder if it's advisable to perhaps suspend those elements of presentation skills until we do go back in the classroom and maybe focus more on clarity of message and language use and things like that, because lots of like the eye contact and the movement and things is dependent on students' technology as well. Like some students have problems with cameras, or some of them seem to have their camera pointed at the ceiling or at the top of the head.
I know.
You know,
and even for us as teachers, like I tell the students look at the camera when they're speaking, but even as a teacher, when you're grading the students, and it's hard to know, are they looking at the camera or are they looking away or what? It's very difficult to judge if they're looking at the camera. So that could be an idea, Nick, maybe to suspend. Well, I would encourage them to look at the camera, because you do have students just reading a script still. So they're looking down, which is not good for even an online presentation. You have to look straight ahead. But yeah, maybe not to be too strict on grading as a teacher with maybe eye contact when it's online, because it's difficult to judge if a student is looking at the camera or not. Yeah, with that. So yeah, that's a hard one to get around. Yeah, that one.
I have a question about students who try a bit too hard to do these kind of presentation skills. Have you heard of there's a Japanese phrase called eigo rashisa, which translates to kind of imitation of a L1 English speaker or something like that. And I've taught at junior high schools in Japan, and teachers kind of teach their students to use lots of gestures. My name is Peter. Today I'm going to talk about 3 things.
And they have the 3 and the,
yeah, and it just becomes somewhat unnatural, and I kind of think you're trying a bit too hard and you're not really being true to yourself in some ways. It's somewhat disingenuous, I guess.
Yeah.
Word.
No, I agree. Some students can, some students can, which it's all about being natural when you're presenting. So I do tell students, like, my activities I introduced there for moving around, but there are presentations when you don't move around. Yeah, you don't, like, or you don't have to speak in a loud voice, because if you're talking about someone who's a serious topic, you can lower the tone. Yeah, so so I try and incorporate that into students as well, the different messages you want to send with the presentation. Yeah, so it's all about practice, though, Pete. Yeah, just practicing in class and teaching the students what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. Like that.
For a moment, I thought you had a game where students just stared into each other's eyes for as long as possible until one of them gave up.
Yeah, whoever's one that blinks first is out. Yeah. No.
But I realised pretty soon after that wasn't how it worked.
No, God, no. So they have to be. So you do have students as well, like machine gun students, with the eye contact game. They kind of just go up and down. So I said no, it has to be natural. Yeah, it has to be natural eye contact. So, but that's a very fun game. I would recommend definitely when we're back on, if you are on campus at the moment, or when we're back on campus, students really enjoyed that. Yeah.
I always tell students as well that never stop on anybody for more than 1 second. Don't just look, kind of, jump from face to face to face kind of thing. Yeah. I thought, no, I like that game idea. I'll definitely use it.
So they're very practical. It's not just activities that I've used in class and that worked for me. So I thought I'd share them here with you guys tonight. So hopefully you can use them, and I said improve the quality of the presentations in class for your students.